Om Sadashiva Samarambham Shankaracharya Mathyamam Asmadacharya Paryantam Vande Guru Paramparam. Om. Okay, we will jump straight on to verse 3 because we were comprehensive with verse 2, and we will obviously recover some key points in verse 2, including this. You'll see maybe the chart in the background. I will bring that forward also for the illustration of verse 5 to help us see the big picture according to the Vedic model that we will see. It's actually the Sankhya model, but it's also a model that the Bhagavad Gita has borrowed. Okay, so let's jump on to verse 3. Tat kshetram yachaya drikcha yadvikaryatashchayat sachayo yat prabhavascha tat samasena me shirnu.
What is that kshetra, of what nature it is? What are its modifications? From what has it come, and from who is the kshetranya, and what is his glory? For that, listen to me in brief. Now the nature of kshetra is going to be told as to of what sort it is. Its nature is going to be explained by describing its constituents. Not only that, what type of modification it is subject to, from what does it arise, what cause-effect relationship that are within the kshetra itself, and what glories, what shaktis are there for the kshetranya. With the upadhi are all going to be told. The kshetranya is purely satyam, jnanam, anantam, Brahma. It has no power to create, but with the maya upadhi, it becomes everything.
All right, so in verse 3, Krishna is saying that in verse 2 and verse 1, which we have elaborated, Krishna is saying in those verses, I have briefly touched upon the topic of kshetrajna and kshetram. Now, says Krishna, I will elaborate further, in further details, what is the relationship between kshetrajna and kshetram. So it seems like we've already covered a few things in verse 1 and 2. Well, there is much more to cover in respect to these two realities in order to comprehend the entire vision of Advaitam, of oneness. And then Krishna says, what will I elaborate? And he basically mentions three topics. The first topic is the effects within kshetram. When I say kshetram, I'm talking about the entire visible universe, everything that we can infer or perceive. So what are the effects within that? What are some of the observations that we can pinpoint in this universe? Not things that we already know about, but some of the things that we don't know about. Otherwise, I would just tell you, go and learn physics or quantum physics or science. So we will get to see what is included in kshetram and what are some of its effects within the scope of kshetram. He then also says, we will also learn what are the causes of kshetram. So the first one, what are the effects? That means what are some of the constituents that we can observe? But now, what are the causes? What actually causes that kshetram to be as it is? What causes this world to be the way that it is? What causes these laws to work in respect to objects? What causes this relationship to work in such a way that we can not only observe it, but the very observation itself is also a law? What causes that law? So here we will learn how specifically is this kshetram made out of this one substance that I was referring to and showing us in the last sessions in verse 1 and 2. Of this one content, how specifically does kshetram come out of it? How specifically is kshetram made out of consciousness? This will also be elaborated. And then he also says, what are some of the modifications that kshetram undergoes in order to become this manifest universe? So again, how exactly does this universe come together and create this that we are now experiencing? Okay, and then he also says, what are the causes which take place for kshetram to be created, sustained, and destroyed? Again, so we are going behind kshetram. Kshetram is fine, the universe is there. But what is that behind the universe that makes the universe so, that makes the universe as it is? He also mentions what are the glories of the kshetrajna. So what is the glory of kshetram's cause? And what is kshetram's cause? Kshetrajna. So what is the glory of that kshetrajna? The ultimate cause from which all kshetrams arise. This entire universe comes. He also says, Krishna, in other words, to rephrase what I said, what is the glory of Brahman when conditioned by his own limitless Maya? What is that glory? So what are we going to see? We will see the cause-effect relationship of this universe and within this universe. And we will also see that every effect in this universe has a cause, whether perceived or non-perceived, there is still a cause for every effect that you can observe, postulate, or theorize. And then we will also see what is the origin and what is the first source of everything. The source from which there's no previous. So this is what verse 3 is saying. And then we can now go on to verse 4. Rishibhir bahudha gitam chandobhir vividaif pritaka brahma sutra padaishchaiva hetumadbhir vinishchitaihi.
In many ways, it is sung by the rishis. It is also sung by the sentences of the Vedas as something that is varied and also as something that is distinct. And it is indeed explained by the sentences of the Veda, which reveal Brahman without doubt by implication and with reasoning.
Continue.
Gitam, it is sung, meaning it is said in mantras or by using pleasant words. Bahuda, in many ways by the rishis. How have they said it? Through the Veda. Chandobahi, Chandas means meter, and because the Veda is composed metrically, Chandas becomes a name for the Veda. By the mantras of all four Vedas, this is said, Vivadehi, in different ways. The Taittiriya Upanishad speaks of the creation beginning with the five elements as the Kshetra and the Kshetranya, as Satyam, Yanam, Anantam, Brahma. In other Upanishads, the Kshetra and the Kshetranya are presented differently, but all of them speak of the nature of the Kshetra and Kshetranya as distinct pratak. One is Atma, the other is Anatma. One is cause, the other effect. One is Satya, the other is Mithya.
So it is evident by this reading that the different Upanishads will present this model of reality in different ways. So they will present it from different angles. So now you say, why there's so many Upanishads? Because they all, as I said, present the one reality as it says here. One is Atma, another is Anatma. One is cause, the other is an effect. One is Satya, the other is Mithya. These are all models presented by different Upanishads to help us recognize and to assimilate this reality firmly. So this means you don't have to now go and read every single Upanishads. They're all saying the same thing. Some people prefer the Mandukya Upanishad. Some prefer the Kena Upanishad. They're all beautiful in their own right. It's always going to be Atma, Anatma, Satya, Mithya, cause, effect. Of course, it's going to be in a much more sophisticated way than I'd explain it now, but it's going to be the foundation of those teachings. So verse 4 is saying that the very topic of kshetrajna and kshetra viveka, so notice what the description said, Atma, Anatma, Satya, Mithya, cause, effect. Chapter 13, kshetra, kshetrajna. So in other words, it's still one and the same teaching. It's always coming back to that same distinction between the changing and the unchanging. So the very topic of kshetrajna and kshetra viveka is so significant, says verse 4, that vividaihi chandobhihi. It is thus mentioned in all of the Vedas, in all of the Vedic texts, including Shastra, Itihasa, Smrti, Puranas, Bhashyams. Right? Bhashyam is the commentaries as presented by Adi Shankara and many of our acharyas that have done so well for our tradition to clarify some points contradicting in nature. And they're all presented in the form of mantras. And then verse 4 says, why is this knowledge of kshetrajna and kshetram viveka, atma anatma, satya-mithya so significant? Because if one assimilates the distinction between matter and spirit, see again, I brought another term. I said Satya-mithya, cause effect, kshetrajna, kshetram, matter, spirit. So these are all distinctions of the one reality. So once this distinction of matter and spirit, in other words, the appearances and the content of all appearances, once that has been understood, then the entire universe at once becomes at ease in your understanding. No more does one want to go and learn physics after physics, knowledges after knowledges, hoping to find the final reality. The Vedas has already provided that and has been providing that for a long time. We're now simply expounding what is already out there. It's never going to be different. No one's going to come in the future and say, oh, see, the Vedas were wrong and here's something else. Because when you go through the Vedas, you recognize no matter what argument you bring up, the Vedas is already on top of it. Okay, so once this kshetrajna and kshetram distinction has been recognized clearly, then one has, from that standpoint, accomplished the highest goal as a human purusha, as a human being. In other words, what is the highest purpose of being born? There are many purposes, and they are all secondary. And what is the primary purpose? The Vedas is clear. Out of those four purusharthas, moksha is number one. So what is moksha? Ascertaining the distinction between these two realities. Even fields of science, as respectable and interested as we are in these fields, and they are brilliant minds, I tell you. So we are not any time going to put someone down, because think about it from their standpoint. These are well-educated men and women who go to work and spend years and years researching, looking, creating computer models, learning the programming languages, right? Theorizing, postulating, hypothesizing the right models in order to help humanity understand the existence. So this is why, from this understanding, there is absolutely no space to degrade someone's efforts by saying, oh, they're just wasting their time. In fact, you and I are now using computers and Zoom because there was some time, at some point, a man who wanted to discover long distance communication. So we created optical fibers and we put them underneath our oceans. We put the satellites in the atmosphere, and now we're using that to communicate with each other across different countries. So think about the great efforts of our men and women that have presented and given forth to us that you and I are now using. So there's no space ever to put someone down. We need to keep the big picture that everyone has contributed something into this world. Okay. So these sciences, getting back, as brilliant as they are, some of them are, in fact, all of them are still figuring out what is the theory of everything. They're trying to find, or attempting to the best of their abilities, to discover the theory of everything, that final particle, the particle which is the substratum behind all particles. And in one way or the other, reality still remains a mystery. That's why they're still very active in this discovery. But Vedas has been answering this question since the beginning. And what does Vedas say? The reality is very simple. Reality equals consciousness appearing as the material universe. That's the formula. And we will now see more into detail how this statement is actually true by providing you some details. And then further, the verse continues and it says, okay, Rishi Bihi Gitam. So because this knowledge answers everything, Rishi Bihi Gitam, it is thus sung and propounded. In other words, it is taught by the rishis. What exactly is taught? Kshetra, kshetrajna, viveka, Satya-mithya, atma, anatma, cause, effect. And then further, the verse continues, how exactly is the answer to reality given? It says pratak, that means distinctly. The question is, what is this distinction provided by the Vedas? That reality is a Satya-mithya relationship. And this relationship I want to show you, I've created a diagram just to revise and help us see what it means to say Satya-mithya relationship. So I'm going to share a screen with us now. Okay, I call this the mithya within mithya. In other words, form within form within form. Remember what mithya means, please? It means it depends upon something else. So let's just start with different kinds of wood that we have. We have cherry, we have maple, we have red oak, we have walnut. So just think of when we say the word wood. Wood itself has different properties which make it different kind of wood. So this means there is an intelligence that creates wood, but it creates a different constituents of what wood is made of, which I will show us now, in order to create different kinds of wood. So this means the wood differences, the species differences. Think about all of the birds, right? We don't have just kingfisher. We've got eagle, and then you don't have just one eagle with one personality. You've got eagles with different personalities. In that same way, you've got trees. Even if you take cherry trees, every cherry tree looks different. Every cherry tree shares a different composition depending on its environment. So think about the differences across the board of species, trees, plants. Then let's go a little bit further. Let's look at one of these, but let's just look at wood in general. Now we ask, what is wood made of? So now this wood becomes mithya, right? Because it depends on molecules, lignin and molecule cellulose. So now this will be mithya. But what is going to be satyam from this standpoint, from the standpoint of molecules? This will be satyam, right? In other words, satyam. Why? Because the wood depends on the lignin and cellulose. As we can see, specifically lignin is a composition of different molecules. I've just provided a sample of those molecules. Lignin can be different. Now you look at the details, right? You look at oxygen, carbon, hydrogen, right? And then you look at the composition that makes that lignin. Without getting into too much detail, let's look at something simple. Cellulose consists of 45 plus minus percent inside wood. So if you look at any wood on this earth, you say, what is this wood made of? It's made of lignin, 25% plus minus, and it's made of cellulose, 45% plus minus. So now you look at cellulose and you ask, what is cellulose made of? Right? So now cellulose becomes mithya. But if you look what cellulose is made of, it's made of 6 carbon atoms, 10 hydrogen atoms, and 5 oxygen atoms. So now from the standpoint of the atoms, this becomes satyam, right? Now you ask, okay, so what does atom consist of? And then we see, okay, so let's look inside the atom. And then we say, okay, so here's the atom. And then inside the atom, we have an electron that is basically floating around in orbit. And then in the center, we have a atomic nuclei. And then you look inside the atomic nuclei. Here it is, atomic nuclei. Now we go even smaller, right? And then we say, okay, so atomic nuclei consists of a proton and a neutron. So the black ones are the neutrons and the red ones are the protons. And then you say, okay, can we go even smaller? Absolutely. So inside, what is a proton and a neutron made of? Well, it's made of quark up and quark down. There's also a gluton in there. Okay, so this means the atom is no longer satyam. What is now satyam? The quark up, quark down gluton, right? In respect to the neutron and proton. So what I'm showing basically here is, if you just stop at wood, that is your final reality. That becomes your satyam. But if you look further you go, okay, well, there's lignin and there's cellulose. If you stop there, that becomes your final reality. But if you look further, there's atoms. If you stop there, that becomes your final reality. If you look further, then you look, okay, well, there's electron, there's a neutron, there's a proton, and then there's a quark up and there's a quark down. Okay, so this so far is the science model, right? So a certain area of science would say this is what the world basically is made of. It's made up of particles. And then quantum field theory comes later, and then it's going to dispute that. But let's just see how we progress from science. We've got Democritus, 400 BC, atom. Then we've got J.J. Thomson, 1897, electron. Then we've got 1912 by Ernest. Atom has a nucleus. There it is. Atom has a nucleus right here. Notice the dates. 400 BC, 1897, 1912. Notice how we're progressing. And then we further discover, if we look inside the atom with the right instruments, we say nucleus composed of protons and neutrons. In other words, once we discover this nucleus, we further ask, what is this nucleus made of? And then we say, well, it's made of proton and neutron. And then we go in the 1960s, we discover that proton and neutron is further composed of quark up and down, which I've just shown you, quark up and quark down. Okay. So this is an interesting model. This is a model that often Vedanta will use to show you this relationship between Satya-mithya, because it's quite easy to assimilate. You can see that at every level, you keep going down, 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 down. No level remains absolute Satyam. It transforms into Mithya the moment you go further down. But then you got quantum field theory, which says something different. It says that there's no such thing as particles. Right? So this whole model of science depends on particles. Then we say, well, these particles are just, waves in the field. Now you go and look what these waves in the field are. I'm not going to get into quantum physics now. But then these waves in the field can be further reduced into 0-point energy. This is the language now of quantum field theory. So in other words, I'm going now even smaller. And then in 0-point energy, there are virtual particles. Again, this is all quantum field theory language. I know it's unfamiliar, but it doesn't matter. What I'm trying to show is how it's going smaller, smaller, and smaller. And then these virtual particles are further consisting of matter and antimatter, which are actually just matter, but they make a distinction between matter as matter and antimatter. And then the Upanishads comes. Now, this is where quantum field theory stops. And this is where now, further down, our Vedas takes over. It says, well, okay, we don't disagree with any of this, right? We don't disagree with the quantum field theory model. We don't disagree with the science model. In fact, it is quite beautiful, and we use it to demonstrate the teaching. But then the question is, what puts these things together? What creates the virtual particles? What creates the matter and antimatter? What puts them together to create the next assembly upwards? Right, what puts, for example, the quark up and down, and how many specifically are added in order to create a proton and neutron? Where is that template of knowledge that says this many quarks and quark ups and quark downs equals neutron and equals proton? What says that specific number of number? That is knowledge. And that knowledge is what we call Maya, which I will explain us in verse 5. So, in fact, before we even go to Maya, we say, well, out of what does this matter and antimatter come out of? Because in quantum field theory, they will say that this matter and antimatter is going in and out of existence. Okay, fine. But where is it when it's not there? Like, out of what is it coming? In other words, this is where Upanishad takes over and says, there is a state of manifest and unmanifest. And this manifest and unmanifest is a place of state of Maya. And this unmanifest and manifest is further reduced into, or is dependent upon the causal body. The causal body is the total knowledge of this entire universe. That means this entire universe has a certain property to it. Right? So when the universe comes, when there's no Big Bang yet, and there's no time and space, the question is, where is all of that knowledge stored? That is what we call the causal body. I will show this in verse 5. And this causal body is the karma for the entire present cycle of creation. In the Vedas, we call this the Brahmaji day, the one day of Brahmaji, the day whereby the universe comes, and it has already come with a template of knowledge carried over from the previous creation. So this universe that we're now experiencing is just a continuity of the previous round of creation that was there when this universe was not. So in other words, this universe is here now, and then there's nothing, and there's the previous universe. We are now in this universe right here. Now this, whatever is happening in this universe is just a continuation of whatever happened in this universe. So it's just a carryover. So the question is, where is this stored? Where is all of the knowledge stored? And that is what we call Maya, the intelligence. Okay. Now, last week or maybe 2 weeks ago, Pavan mentioned Hawking radiation. And he wanted to show that Hawking, okay, how did this conversation come up? I said that nothing in this universe is uncaused. And I think Pavan said that Hawking radiation is uncaused. Now, okay, so that is, okay, so we have to look at it in a different way. Everything has a cause. For example, what is Hawking radiation dependent upon? Black holes. If there's no black holes, there's no Hawking radiation. So Hawking radiation is also an effect on the basis of a cause, which is a black hole. So Hawking radiation is an effect, black hole is the cause. And then you ask, what is the cause of a black hole? Time, because black hole is a time-based event. But you can reduce time even further, because if you take an hour, for example, how many minutes is 1 hour? Okay, it's 60 minutes. But you can reduce minutes further into 60 seconds. You can reduce a second further into milliseconds. You can reduce a millisecond further into a picosecond. You can reduce that, keep going on and on and on. In other words, no matter what you show me in this universe, the answer is always going to be the same. Number one, it depends upon something else. And number two, it can be further reduced into something else. If you cannot find it, I'm just going to say this, you can reduce it into time itself, because it wasn't there and now it is. Therefore, even Hawking radiation is a cause. Cause of what? Cause of black holes. Black hole is a cause of what? A law. So you cannot just say that something is uncaused. It is caused based on a certain law. If X happens, then Y is the result. That is a law. That's called the law of karma. Okay, so why am I showing this? Just to demonstrate that there's not one thing in creation that you can find without a preceding cause. Now the question is, what is the first cause? And this we will see in verse 5. Okay, so this chart was a summary of this Satya-mithya relationship, and it was just to demonstrate how things further resolve into a smaller constituent. The question now is, what makes those constituents so? That is what we call that intelligence. There's no Hawking radiation unless, what is Hawking radiation? Made up of particles, antiparticles, and gamma rays. Okay, so what made up the gamma rays? What made up those particles? What made up those antiparticles? That is called knowledge, sattva guna. And that's called Maya. Okay, I don't want to make this too kind of intellectual. I just want to make it practical enough that to show you the main key points. I'm really not into kind of going, into these endless, theoretical intellectual topics. And then verse 4 then continues, and it says, Hetu mad bihi. So these mantras, which are sung by the rishis, they are backed up by reasoning and logic, and they cannot be contradicted from any angle at any time. For example, the Brahma Sutra consists of 555 verses, which is divided into 4 sections or 4 chapters, divided into 16 parts, divided into 192 topics. 192 topics, what do they deal with? They deal with those topics which the intellectuals want to know about. And what are those topics? Like for example, how did this universe, for example, Robert asked me the question, if Maya is a power in Brahman, does that not mean that Maya is a attribute of Brahman? So these are some of the topics, highly sophisticated and specialized topics that Brahma Sutra will answer to help out those who are highly intellectual in nature. For most of us, it is not needed because generally we just need to see a few charts that I've just shown, and that is good enough for you. For the rest of us, we're like, no, that's not good enough. Let me go and get into more details about this. So that's when the Brahma Sutra comes handy. And what does Brahma Sutra do? It logically analyzes the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita. So whatever the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita are saying, if you need that logical proof, that's where the Brahma Sutras are handy. The Brahma Sutra also establishes Advaita Vedanta as non-contradictory in opposition to other schools of thought. For example, the Nyaya Shastra concludes that consciousness is a property of matter. In fact, this is what we often think. We think that, when this matter, this brain gets born, then the consciousness comes. This is a very common notion in today's fields of biology or sciences. Or Sankhya philosophy, which is very close to Advaita Vedanta, by the way. Sankhya philosophy says that, or concludes that consciousness is distinct from matter. So Nyaya Shastra says consciousness is a property of matter, and Sankhya philosophy says that consciousness is distinct from matter. So in other words, there's two realities according to Sankhya. There's consciousness reality, and there is matter. That's the only difference, by the way, between Sankhya and Advaita Vedanta. There's a few more differences, but where does then Advaita come? It shows that there's a logical flaw there, because now you're creating two realities. And if you want to create two, then you have to now account for the space in between, what is accommodating both of them. Also, Vyasa, who is the author of Brahma Sutra, he shows that the Vedantic view is correct from every possible angle, not in a subjective sense, but as in listening to what other schools have to say and then saying, okay, so let's take your argument and now let's show you the argument in the light of Advaita Vedanta. So in other words, he, by this doing, preserves the essence and the non-contradictory nature of Advaita Vedanta. So that's where the Brahma Sutras are handy. Okay, and then Krishna says, because the next two verses, which is 5 and 6, are important, because Krishna will expand on the big picture, Arjuna, listen. Mahabhutanyahankaraha buddhiravyakta evacha indriyani dashaikam cha panchachendriya gocharaha ichadvesha sukham dukkam Sanghatash-chetana dhritihi etad kshetram samasena savikaram udahritam.
The 5 subtle elements, the Hiranyagarbha, the Samashti Buddhi, the manifest cause, Maya, the 10 organs and 1 mind, the 5 sense objects, desire, aversion, pleasure, pain, the physical body, cognition, fortitude. All this is kshetra, which is stated briefly along with its modifications.
So I'm going to do screen sharing and put some notes above these words. Okay, Mahabhutan, you can put 5 subtle elements in your paper. This is important because I want to take us through a map of creation. Ahankaraha Hiranyagarbha. So the question is, what is the reason for this exhaustive study? Because to distinguish the knower, the self, kshetrajna, from the known, kshetram, we need a thorough understanding what constitutes the world of objects. Because if we don't have that understanding, then when this session ends, you're going to say, what about this phenomena, right? And these questions don't end. Because the moment quantum physics comes in, you can say, oh, what about Hawking's radiation, right? What about virtual particles? So you're going to keep on adding term after term. It's not going to have an ending to it. So this is why we need a distinct teaching to show us that clearly this belongs in the kshetram and this is kshetrajna. Now both verses will expound what makes up this field, kshetram. Specifically, verse 5 will elaborate what are the causes of kshetram, which I've spoken about earlier, and what are the ingredients mixed together to create kshetram. Right? So this and this added together, and then you have this universe. What are those ingredients? So verse 5 is the expertise of our Shastra. This is where we need the Shastra. No amount of science can get you outside kshetram, because then you're going to say, well, how do you know? That's why you need the Shastra. And then verse 6 will elaborate what are some seen effects within the kshetram, specifically in reference to the jiva, to the human body. And this is the field of, well, science can also help us here, but specifically we'll also look at it from the Shastric standpoint. And then verse 6 also says, to help explain this reality, various methodologies are used. Every methodology will categorize reality into different orders to help us see the big picture. For example, you got Vaisheshika. Vaisheshika philosophy will divide the universe into 7 orders of reality, into a 7-fold nature. So Vaisheshika will take the one reality, and to help the student, it will say, here's how to understand the entire reality into a 7-fold nature. Or the Nyaya Shastra will take that same reality, and it will help us to demonstrate, or help us to understand reality into 16-fold nature. And then you got the Sankhya philosophy. The Sankhya philosophy comes and says, that same reality I will show you in a 24-fold nature. So verse 5 and 6 is borrowing Sankhya philosophy's 24 model to help us understand the big picture. Right? So this is where Sankhya also has contributed to our Vedic teaching. Now, to do this, instead of talking about it, I'm going to first, rather with you, on the screen, draw it out. And this is where I need you to follow the verses, because I'll also use my piece of paper, the verse, and I will look at every one of these words and start drawing out on the iPad to help us visually see the creation as expounded in verse 5. The first cause, and this will be called kshetrajna. This is also called Brahman, because it is consciousness. And in chapter 7, we call this para prakriti. So para prakriti is chapter 7. And we'll call this the supreme cause. More about this will be in verse 19 to 23. So if you think this is it, no, there's much more coming in later verses. All right. So this is all kshetranya. Now let's draw a line. Okay, everything below the line will be kshetram. And this is in chapter 7 called apara prakriti. Okay, now the first word is going to say is, now I'm going to give you the right order because these words are, they're sort of in the right order, but I'll give you the right order. Avyaktam, prakriti, maya. So we'll start from prakriti. The other word for this in Sanskrit is avyakta, which is in the verse. So I'm giving you both the Sankhya words, but also the Vedantic words. And avyakta means cause of everything. The other name for this is Maya. Maya means unmanifest potential. The other name for this is Karana Sharira, which means causal body. What is the Karana Sharira? It's a totality of all samskaras or sanchita karma for every object and living being in the universe. All of these are synonymous. Avyakta, Maya, Karana Sharira, or Prakriti. They're all synonymous words. And this is from the standpoint of the macrocosm. Now, if you want to talk about the Karana Sharira from the standpoint of the microcosm, then we will add that also. We'll say microcosm, which is the samskaras of individual. In other words, it's a place of deep sleep, as I spoke about in verse 1 and 2. So where does this person go in deep sleep? Right here, Karana Sharira. So next word is Mahat, because I said it's a different words I'm using. So underneath you put Mahat. What is this Mahat? It is total intelligence of the entire universe. The other name for this is Samashti Buddhi, or the other name for this is Sattva Guna. So Mahat, total intelligence, Samashti Buddhi or Sattva Guna. This is in the first line. Buddhir avyaktam evacha. This is all macrocosm. Now, what about microcosm? This microcosm, that means at the level of the individual. When I say microcosm, it's responsible for rational thinking. Okay, so this is what we have so far. One little note. This is an upati. Remember when I showed upati in verse 1? When I showed that red glass and a transparent jug? So that's what an upadi is. So this entire section here is an upadhi. With this upadhi, Brahman becomes Ishvara. In other words, Brahman, through his limitless power or knowledge, becomes Ishvara.
Can I ask a question?
Mm-hmm.
So Prakriti and Mahat sounds to me like Sat and Chit, or are they different from Sat and Chit? Because Prakriti is existence on all matter, and Mahat is intelligence, which is Chit.
No, Chit is awareness. This is intelligence. Awareness and intelligence are two different things.
Okay.
Okay, and okay, so what is this upadhi? Let's focus on this upadhi. It is a limitless power in Brahman, or limitless power of Brahman. And it also contains knowledge of previous creation. What contains the knowledge? As I said, the upadhi. What is upadhi? I just demonstrated. Mahat Prakriti equals upadhi of what? Of Brahman. What is this upadhi? Limitless knowledge and limitless power, from which the entire creation comes.
Andre, question.
Yes?
Could it then be said that Brahman, through this knowledge of previous incarnations or creations,
Yeah.
Brahman is evolving?
And Brahman is what?
Evolving.
Evolving. Who said Brahman is evolving?
Now, I'm just asking the question. If it attains its previous knowledge of previous creations, is the reasoning for that to add to its knowledge?
Brahman is not evolving, number one. What is evolving is the universe. The causes and effects within the universe are evolving on the basis of their karma, on the basis of what has happened before. Brahman is a knower of what is evolving. Brahman remains uninvolved in what is evolving. In the presence of Brahman, there is knowledge of evolution. Yeah, if Brahman was evolving, then there would be no connection to the previous creation, because Brahman would be the new evolved being.
Yeah, that's what I was going.
Okay. Now, I think in the verse, in the Dayananda's course, this is the starting point of creation. So starting point we'll put here. We're still in the Upadhi, yeah? The Upanishads say this is where the desire, there was a desire, and then from this desire, the entire universe came. And they say it's Atha Bahusyam. In other words, let me become many. And so many came. It's not like, Maya spoke Sanskrit. It's just trying to show you there's a desire inherent, and then from that desire, the entire universe came. Since when? Beginningless beginning. The next word is ahankaraha.
Andre, one question.
Yes?
So this desire came sometime after, or it started, whatever Brahman started, or is there a gap between Brahman and desire?
Now it's not like a desire like a human being has, like, I'm bored, I'm consciousness, I'm so aware, and now I just want to create more of me. But it's a metaphorical description, kind of like a poetical description. And so there was a desire, and from this desire, the entire universe came.
Okay, is there any reason given for that, cause for that desire, or it is?
Okay, so let's put this question. Okay, so let's put this question. Is there
Okay.
a reason for desire?
Cause or reason, yeah.
The other word for this is Hiranyagarbha. The other name for this is Ishvara. Now, this is Ishvara as the creator, playing the role of creator, who is in the Vedas called Brahmaji. This is the cosmic sense of I. Just like a jiva has a sense of I am, this is the entire universe going, I am limitless. Just like a jiva, says, I am this much. In other words, I am this much. I'm this knowledge. I'm this person. Ishvara, I am everything. In other words, Brahman says, I am everything by the help of his own power of Maya. Therefore, this is the cosmic sense of I am. When this I am says I am, it is not ignorant because it is all knowledge, all power. But when an individual says I am, how much is included in that I am? Only this much. Parents, conditioning, culture, therefore very little is included in the jiva's I am, and that is called ignorance. But that ignorance is not there for Ishvara, because when Ishvara says I am, at that moment he enjoys the entire self as limitless whole. So let's put cosmic sense of I. So what I'm showing you here is there's a correlation between the macrocosm and the microcosm. As above, so below. Now, from the standpoint of the macrocosm, so if Ishvara says, I am, not that Ishvara actually says I am, but it's a metaphorical teaching, then it will be equated to I know everything, or I am everything. The irony is the jiva says that too, but they only mean this much. But so in their world, everything means just this little person. So both of them are saying the same thing, but this is the everything. Macrocosm just means the whole. Microcosm means the individual. So let's do the microcosm. In other words, the ahamkara from the standpoint of the individual. And this plays what role? It gives a sense of individuality. In other words, I am. So now we go into the 5 subtle elements. So this is what we have so far. Next one is Mahabhuta. This is the 5 subtle elements. You should be asking what are the 5 subtle elements, etc. In Sanskrit, they're called the Tanmatras. What are these 5 subtle elements? They are space, and the property of space is sound. Air, property of air is touch. This will all make sense later. Fire, property of fire is form. Water, property of water is taste. And earth, property of earth is smell. Notice so far, 5 elements, 5 senses. Sense for sound, sense for touch, sense for form, sense for taste, and sense for smell. So we are now slowly coming to the physical creation. Remember, there's no universe yet. There's nothing. There's not even time or space yet. This is still before time and space is even come, before the kshetram has even come in terms of the universe. Okay, so the question is, what are 5 subtle elements, right? And the answer is they are the building blocks of the universe. In the science model I've shown you, the building blocks is, for example, quark up and down, right? Boson or strings even. Or the other way to put it is the substance upon which the senses function. In other words, what are the 5 senses? They are that which is heard, touched, smelled, seen, which is perceived in form of this universe. Next one is Dasha Indriyani. What are these organs? They are organs of action. So let's create organs of action. They're called Karma Indriyani. Karma just means action. And the other are Jnana Indriyani. That means organs of perception. Question is, what are the 5 organs of action? So we'll put 5. Speech, that's what you're using to communicate with me. I'm using that right now to communicate with you. They are hands, when we shake hands. They are feet, A to B, we move. They are sex organ, helps reproduction, gives us a chance for moksha. And 5, excretion. And then jnana indriyani are also 5 in number. Ears, in other words, organ for sound. 2, skin, organ to pick up touch. 3 is eyes. 4 is tongue. And 5 is nose. Okay, so what are these dasha indriyani? They are the organs by which the world is perceived but also engaged with. Next one is ekam, 1. It just says here 1, but it actually means manas, the mind. And so the mind, what's the function of the mind? It combines the perception from the sense organs, the jnana indriyani, right? Because you need to put that into the screen of the mind. You need to put together the hearing and the sight and the sound onto one big screen to make sense of it. So it combines that perception. And also it executes the judgment of the intellect. So if the intellect decides this is what to do, then the manas will send that signal. Therefore, your hands will move accordingly. It will therefore cross the road safely. Via how? Through the karma indriyani. That means, see, you need your organs to be functioning in order to execute what you have concluded, and that's why you have the karma indriyani. Indriya gocharaha. So this is the 5 gross elements. So before we, I know you're going to be asking, how do you convert 5 subtle elements into 5 gross elements? So for that, it goes through a process called Panchikarana. So new section, I'm going to put line here. This is the process of conversion of 5 subtle elements, which we've just described to you now, into 5 gross elements. Now you should be asking, how exactly do you convert 5 subtle elements into 5 gross elements? Okay. This conversion is actually mentioned in Tattva Bodha. So you have the 5 subtle elements. I'm going to show you how the conversion happens. Suppose you take space. So these are in the state of subtle. So now we want to go from subtle into gross. So now we will say space. In other words, this is the process where now the universe is able to come, the physical universe, where actual time space is able to come. So what happens is half of space gets taken, half of property of space gets taken, and the 4 quarters of each one of them get assigned to the space. So 1, 2, 3, 4. In other words, you got now space and you got air, fire, water, earth. For air, half of air gets taken, and then you got 4 quarters of others, or quarter of each. Space, fire, water, earth. This process that I just shown you is explained in the Tattva Bodha and is called Panchikarana, conversion from 5 subtle elements into 5 gross elements. Now the next word here is Indriya Gocharaha, 5 gross elements. I've just shown you how the process happens. How to understand these 5 gross elements? They are the 5 types of objects detectable via the jnana indriyani. So let's write that down. And then we'll go and put an arrow all the way to jnana indriyani. So far, no creation. Now creation comes, Big Bang. In other words, Jagat. What is Jagat? Time, space, and all objects in time and space. This is the time of the Planck length, the smallest possible measurement. Okay, we'll maybe write like this. Right, the universe expands in 1 split second. So from this Big Bang, what do we have? Now we have, according to the blueprint in the Maya, we have planets. We have a little person who's now writing this down.
Andre?
Yes?
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
I'm really confused. If the jivas only just come, then why are the dasha indriyani way back there before creation?
Good. In other words, because the jiva needs to come with a mind, with an antahkarana. So you need to have that blueprint already created in order for the jiva to come to manifest inside a physical body. Because you cannot, what are you going to manifest inside a physical body? Just nothing? So in other words,
So the key word is the dasha indriyani is just a blueprint.
it's a blueprint, yeah. So it's still
unmanifest.
It's still unmanifest blueprint.
Got it.
Giving way for the antahkarana once the physical universe has come.
Okay, that makes much more sense.
This is what I love, how you ask questions after I've done the work, and then we can kind of have a conversation.
If I can continue on that same line, is there a macrocosm concept and a microcosm concept to the 5 subtle elements and dashendriyanis?
Okay, let me start with dashendriyani, a blueprint ready to be inherited by all of the jivas that are yet to be born. So this is a blueprint specifically for the microcosm jiva. The 5 subtle elements cannot be on the microcosm. They have to first convert into a gross element form. And that gross element form then pervades this entire universe of forms. So whatever we see, whatever we pick up, that is called 5 elements. So what is this universe that we perceive? 5 elements.
But Andre, according to evolution, we didn't get all the 5 senses in a single go, right? They evolved as time progressed. So what about that?
What has evolved?
Every sense, for example, vision has evolved in sometimes, and audio capacity came later. Skin came later, like that. All the senses did not come in a single instance, right?
So I'm now skipping, of course, a huge period of Neanderthals, and, the Homo sapiens, and the whole evolution is taking time. But I'm now going right to the stage where the person is able to actually communicate with this world, and also even plants, right? They also have sense organs to perceive the world, to maneuver and to catch the prey. You need to hear the prey, you need to smell the prey, you need to see the prey, but also you need to run for the prey. So this blueprint is there for all species, all jivas in all universes, in all worlds. Yeah, but there is an evolution in this aspect of gross evolution. We understand that.
Yeah, but there was a time where there were no jivas at all, right?
Indeed. So there was no time. There were dinosaurs, and but the jivas then came later. So I'm now skipping the entire period of no time of jivas. I'm showing us the period where there are jivas. And also jiva doesn't just mean physical person. Jiva means any living being with a subtle body. It can be a plant, or it can be a species or an insect. So there were jivas way before us jivas, human beings.
But there was a time where before, during planet creation and solar system creation, where there was no life at all. So what about that?
Okay, so now we have to now speak how life came. Is that what you want to ask?
Yeah, but there was billions of years where there was no life at all, right? So what was the reason for that gap?
So Pavan is asking, what is this reason where there was no jivas? And the simple answer is, microbes need to come together through the course of time intelligently to come together to create a sustainable environment. For example, we first had to grow up the trees in order to help us release enough oxygen inside the atmosphere to be sustainable for jivas to actually breathe. This takes a long time.
What is the reason for delay? That's the question.
What's the reason for delay?
Yeah, given that Maya has infinite power.
Yeah, Pavan, anything in the universe has a delay, and it's not necessarily a delay of, Maya's kind of like having a party or waiting. It's just a delay in terms of evolution. Things take time. Anywhere we look, right, it takes time to evolve from A to B. So it's not a delay. It's more like a natural evolution of things.
Time according to humans too, on a human scale, which is pretty insignificant.
Okay, thank you, Lorena and Pavan. So we have planets, we have a jiva. Or you can put a dinosaur here if you want. It depends what jiva you want. And we also have laws and orders in which this universe operates. Right? For example, the law that dictates the distance between the sun and a sustainable planet to harbor life, that is Earth. Specifically in the Shastra, also adds two laws, is dharma and karma. So we'll put karma, which is not going to be found in science. This is where the Vedas are required. Karma, dharma, which both can be observed in our life, but also simple laws like gravity. Now, verse 6. So this is verse 5 so far. Don't worry, I will come back to this, and I will also elaborate it further on this chart behind me next session. Now, verse 6 is going to continue and talk about this jiva here. Let me show you how it is indeed a 24 model that we've just presented. So we started off with Prakriti, Mahat, Sankara like that. So that's 1, 2, 3 so far. Prakriti is Maya, Mahat is Sattva Guna, that means the knowledge of creation, and Ahankara is Hiranyagarbha. Mahabhuta, 5 subtle elements. Dasha, Indriyani, 10. Manas, that is 1. Indriya, Gocharaha, 5 gross elements. 5, 5, 10 plus 10, 20 plus 3, 23 plus 1, 24. And the individual in verse 6 will add 25. So next week, I will focus on verse 6 specifically in reference to jiva, because I have to now bring this back down to you practically so you can relate to it as a human being. If we just stay at this high teaching, then you say, how does this even matter to me? How is this relevant? So now we have to bring this relevancy down to a human level next week. And I will talk about how your mind actually undergoes these further modifications as expounded in verse 6. And then I will also answer, how does kshetrajna become the kshetram world in reference to this chart over here? So there's more explaining to do. What have I shown you so far? A model so you can chew on it until next week. And you can formulate questions that we can have a conversation next week, if that is to be. Om Purnamadav Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.